Hey everyone, what follows is an edited version of the Winter 2025 anime preview show that streamed on Twitch last Sunday, where I discussed these 19 new titles in little scripted segments, answered some comments or questions after each, and had our freeform, unscripted interludes section in the middle, which was especially freewheeling and opinionated this time around. What a worthless premiere that was. This video has been edited down to just the 19 scripted parts for brevity, as the original stream was 3 hours. The preview show is spoiler light, what I call premise spoilers. For each title, I try to give enough information to form an accurate picture of its setup, while holding back as many details as I think I can to preserve the novelty of watching their premieres. I also show a selection of clips, which mostly match up with my description, or else provide examples of what the show is doing. And though I don't rate or order the lineup, I do share my initial thoughts on what I perceive as strengths or weaknesses. I wasn't going to put this on YouTube originally, but the sudden loss of Casual Monday means I had nothing to offer you this week otherwise. And though I have no intention of streaming on YouTube as a regular thing, I am considering dual casting the seasonal preview show over here in the future. Also, don't criticize me too harshly for the very plain interface. I am still working on its overhaul. That's it. Please enjoy the Winter 2025 anime preview show. We'll start with Medalist. So with a title like Medalist, and a key image showing ice skating and costumes and all that, I have to presume this story will involve a quest towards medaling in the Olympics, or something that is modeled after the Olympics, in the field of figure skating. What I do know, after watching the premiere, I at least know that the two main characters are already gold medalists, in the field of letting you know exactly what they are feeling whenever they are feeling it. And it goes along with passionate people. And the passion they each have is figure skating. And the problem in pursuing that passion is the same for each of them as well. They started too late in life according to conventional wisdom, which apparently is 5 years old. Inori, our young hopeful, is 11, and Tsukasa, our somewhat embittered job seeker, is 26. Although he apparently didn't even try to start until he was 14 or later. Now, two of them meet on the occasion of Tsukasa showing up to a rink that has a job opening. He doesn't seem to be too big a fan of kids, and witnessing Inori enter in a suspicious manner, he will confront her about whether or not she paid to get in. Tsukasa isn't just the type to narc on a 5th grader, he is also the type to chase them out of the rink and track them down, though he will end up getting more trouble than he bargained for. However, it affords them the chance to talk a bit about why she wasn't paying the entrance fee in the conventional way. She wants to skate, badly, but her mother forbade it after her older sister was injured in the sport and never skated again. She is attempting to teach herself in hopes to one day convince her mother to let her try anyway. But she's already 11, and feeling sympathy for someone about to make the same mistake he did, Tsukasa will give her a list of clubs and impress upon her the urgency of asking her mother as soon as possible. Now, there are other similarities between them. Inori struggles in school, is somewhat ostracized by her peers, and has grown to become a very defeated and uncertain little girl. She's easily moved to tears, but not to anger or confrontation. She just wants this one thing, but having been afraid to broach the subject and bother her mother, it may already have slipped beyond her reach. Tsukasa's interview ends up being for an assistant coach position, something he really wasn't interested in, despite his former skating partner trying to recommend him. We'll see that he too is uncertain, pessimistic about his abilities, and regretful over his indecision in the past. But despite that, there seems to be some kind of skating goal he still stubbornly pursues, the reason that he still wants to work in the field. So, both are set up to make choices about their future while weighed by their past, and the rest of the episode, that I'm not going to tell you about, reveals which way each will choose. Now, unfortunately, my favorite thing about this episode I don't want to reveal, though I did talk about it in what will end up being the last Casual Monday. But my second favorite is the characterization of Inori. It's hard to write children that really feel like children. Anime often either makes them unrealistically precocious, which is fine for humor's sake, but that's not the only time that it happens, or else it infantilizes them to a simplicity that is likewise unrealistic. And while there is one stretch of dialogue where the subtitle word choice might stray into the former, Inori otherwise really seems like a timid and discouraged 11-year-old girl. She'll stray off in the middle of sentences, she's hyper-attuned to how others react to her, she'll play pretend to reassure herself, and she is easily intimidated into silence. She also obsesses as grade schoolers obsess, but since hers is something denied to her, and she has little else to hang her hat on, she's grown into a pitiable creature indeed. You just want to hand her a puppy or something. But she is resilient and tough for all that, making her one of the easiest characters to root for in today's entire lineup. And so, I intend to. The next pair is two sort of enemies to lovers setups. So start first with Medaka Kuroiwa is impervious to my charms. Meet Mona, who has been irresistibly cute from the literal day she was born, if all these flowers and sparkles are to be believed. See how great she is at tag, since none of the boys want to run away from her. And, okay, neither do the girls. Understandably, a lifetime of this leads her to assume she's the queen bee, that no one out there is impervious to her charms. Meet Medaka Kuroiwa, who is impervious to her charms. Actually, he seems downright bothered by her existence. What's a queen bee to do? The answer, as this entire episode seeks to demonstrate, is to try increasingly flirty and provocative things to try to charm him no matter what. And each time she pushes the envelope without success, she is left with embarrassment instead. Even the other guys in class begin to have it out for Medaka, interpreting his attempts to fend her off as rudeness or cruelty, though also perhaps jealousy is factoring in. But what we see in their interactions is that Medaka isn't trying to hurt her. In fact, he rescues her from one embarrassing predicament and gently chides her for being provocative towards someone she doesn't even like. By the end of the episode, we understand where he's coming from, though that at least I will leave out. And Mona has another predicament on her hands entirely. With that out of the way, I think the most amusing part of the premiere is Mona's internal dialogue, which we eavesdrop on rather constantly. Though this is set in Tokyo, she had moved from Osaka a year before, and her thoughts are entirely in animated kansaiben, in contrast to her delicate spoken speech in Tokyo dialect. While she is friendly and polite and demure enough in what she says to others, her inner thoughts reveal someone far more haughty and far more bawdy, scheming over which part of her body to try to tempt him with next, though she will cross her own lines at times in her frustration. Accordingly, then, there is a lot of titillation. However, since she's doing it on purpose, and his reaction to it is the whole point, it's the kind of usage of titillation that doesn't bother me, but you might as well know it's there. Considering she nearly runs the whole gamut, it might only be that way for just this one episode. We'll see. Otherwise, though, it's a very one-note premise so far, and it's helped not at all by a generic look and a very slow start to characterizing Medaka. Mona can't carry the whole thing, I don't think, but there is only a hint of who the supporting cast will be in this first episode. And by hint, I mean there's like 4 characters, they got like one line each to let us know that they'll probably show up in the future. This could easily turn around next episode, to be sure, as Mona is a good foundation for the comedy and the romance to build around. The premiere just hasn't sold me on the whole rest of the package, as I feel like a premiere really should do. It's true, we did in fact get to see Mona from all kinds of angles. Is this what they mean by a well-rounded character? The other in the pair, then. I'm getting married to a girl I hate in my class. Now, the title of this show is misleading, as the opening scene shows us that he is not getting married to a girl in his class that he hates, but that he is already married to her. While I don't love titles that are also premises in a general way, I appreciate them just cutting to the chase like that. But the story then backs up 4 days to show us how exactly this all went down, and why exactly this title character, Saito, hates this girl in his class. Her name is Akane, and in short order, we understand that she's a bit of a stickler and he's a bit of a slacker, and so their dynamic is one in which she needles him for his behavior and he resents her for always being on his case. It rather abruptly introduces secondary characters as well, her fashionable friend Himari, and his cousin Shise, who seemingly was designed to invoke as much Emoto energy as possible. While it's suggested that maybe Akane is on his case because, well, maybe she's into him, she declares that she wouldn't even if he was the last guy on Earth, and he will echo something similar, and we don't even get to smirk at them setting this flag because we already know it happens. At least we understand that there is no love lost between them, and they only spent 90 seconds establishing it. From there, the premise begins to stretch its wings a bit, perhaps pulling a muscle in the process. Saito's grandfather is the legendary head of the Hojo Group, a company that he navigated through recession to become a high-tech global corporation. He is also rather eccentric, energetic in a way that belies his age, and is used to getting his way. Saito is his heir apparent, and Gramps uses that fact to coerce him into joining him for tea. We get the sense it's not the first time Saito has done something because of having the company dangled in front of him. But when he arrives, his arch-nemesis Akane is there as well, having been invited by her grandmother, and neither is particularly happy to see the other. But then, their grandparents arrive together and the four dine as one. There's a toast to celebrate, and if we hadn't had the title or that opening scene to tip us off, we would surely assume that the grandparents were announcing that they were getting married to one another. Instead, they announce that Akane and Saito are getting married. Kanpai! Now, to preserve some of the surprise of this episode, I'm going to skip why the grandparents want this, or how they will try to persuade the two. They'll get a few days to think it through, and we already know that they decide to go for it, but are shocked to learn that they don't mean that they will get married at some future date, but right now, immediately. In fact, we've already bought a house and furnished it for you, and we already had all of your belongings shipped in. And also, there's only one bed. Consider it our number one rule for this arrangement that you can't sleep on the floor or the sofa. Man, I can't imagine what their grandparents are trying to imply here. I mean, what's with this pink heart-shaped hot tub? Or these pillows that say yes on both sides? And actually, this is a part of the episode I like. While there is this kind of innuendo humor, sex is also a subject that Akane at least addresses directly. It was part of what she wrestled with when making up her mind, and suddenly finding herself living with a boy, she goes on guard, convinced that he is looking for a chance to pounce. Her paranoia is turned up a bit for humor, but the subject isn't left out there as something that is ignored or only blushed over. It's out in the open. It's the thing that she is most nervous about. That said, her reactions to almost anything are turned up to 11. By the end of the episode, it maybe is wearing a little bit thin. If he was needling her, or likewise overreacting to innocuous situations, it might be one thing. But in this episode at least, he's doing very normal, sometimes even helpful things, and getting nothing but grief in return, though once she starts yelling, he's more than happy to yell back. He never gives a hint of attraction to her, making her accusations all the more egregious. And I feel like in this kind of slap-slap-kiss setup, it works fine if both characters commit transgressions against the other, but the way she is characterized as a kind of hysterical shrew leaves the dynamic unbalanced. A convoluted rom-com setup is supposed to leave you rooting for them to overcome all the same, but if she persists like this for too long, I feel like it might fall apart. Anyway, both agree to keep the whole thing a secret from everyone else, which will no doubt fuel humorous misunderstandings in the future, though it's not like coming clean would be much better. The opening credits, which run in the middle of the episode, also basically spell out all the complications ahead, so at least the premiere gives you a pretty good picture of what you are signing up for. Alright, so that's that pair. The next pair are my picks for just pure fun. These are just the pure fun shows I'm 100% watching because the premiere was so entertaining. First up is, I may be a guild receptionist, but I'll solo any boss to clock out on time. In settings where you find adventuring guilds and dungeons and quests, you'll meet all sorts of people. Some want to be part of the elite, to join the strongest parties and take on the most dangerous foes, and enjoy all the fame and admiration that follows. Take our pal Gans the Raging Blade here. He's one of the guild's elites. He basks in the glory he and his party Silver Sword have covered themselves in, loves to be the kind of person everyone recognizes, famous enough not to need to show his license to prove who he is. I said, someone everyone recognizes, member of Silver Sword, Gans the Raging Blade, who surely doesn't need to show his license to accept this dangerous quest. Anyway, some other people just want a desk job that's nice and safe, a needed public service that's stable and secure. The kind of job where you wear a cute uniform, guide adventurers with a smile, and then clock out on time to enjoy a harmonious home life. And sometimes the former type of people make it impossible for the latter type to live the life they want because they are taking way too freaking long to finish that dangerous quest already. Such is the situation for our titular guild receptionist. The end boss of a dungeon is proving too much for anyone to defeat, and so long as the boss lives, the monsters keep appearing, and so quests to defeat them keep getting accepted, and the guild is so busy during the day that the paperwork adds up into the night, and after a month of this nonsense, it's time for drastic measures. Coincidentally, there seems to be this mysterious adventurer people call the Executioner, who's able to solo the bosses of dungeons that no one else can conquer. And what do you know? The Executioner shows up while Silver Sword is struggling with said end-boss, and with the right tool for the job, manages to overcome this seemingly unbeatable roadblock. Now, I know what you're thinking, but guild receptionists are public servants. They can't have side jobs. She'd be fired on the spot if they thought she was out here soloing bosses with a fake license card or something. Good thing an oversized hoodie is a completely impenetrable disguise. Anyway, I may be a guild receptionist, but I'll solo any boss to clock out on time obviously tells you its premise, but tells you nothing about its charm. A boss soloing adventurer and a guild receptionist are the two extreme ends of the whole adventuring hierarchy, but even that might not be as extreme as the difference between Alina's inner and outer dialogues. And the series indulges us for this consistent thread of humor, animating her inner thoughts or morphing the environment to reflect her spirited delivery. She just wants this simple life, and circumstances keep disrupting it. She's a kind of anti-adventurer in spirit, by which I don't mean that she hates them, she's just not interested in the things that they are. We're in this fantasy setup of guilds and adventurers and quests we've seen 100 times, but are following around someone who's trying not to have anything to do with the spirit of adventure. So, Alina is a delight, but so is the rest of the production. It's cute when it needs to be cute, it's cool when it needs to be cool, it moves everything along at a very good clip. And though I said it's a fantasy setup we've seen before, it does have a bunch of little unique details that give it its own personality. And it doesn't explain any of the stuff it assumes you already know. It didn't feel like I was watching something I had seen before, basically. Which is high praise these days. If I can get it to go ahead, there we go. SAKAMOTO Days. Now the SAKAMOTO of the title is a legendary hitman, feared by every gangster and admired by those in his trade. No one could stand against him or take him out, except for the cute shop girl he meets one day, whereupon he hangs it up, gets married, becomes a father, and runs a little convenience store. We pick up the stories 5 years into this newfound domestic bliss, when his past comes calling. That past takes the form of Shin the Esper, a fellow hitman who previously worked with SAKAMOTO. He can hardly believe what he finds, even suspects that it's all a cover at first. The legendary hitman running this sleepy shop, playing neighborhood handyman and eating way too much instant ramen? But he does see enough to believe that Sakamoto's skills remain, and so he tries to get him to come back to the biz. Now, Sakamoto isn't having it, though, and Shin can't understand why he would throw away all the fear and respect he's earned in his heyday just for this. But Shin has another problem. this wasn't a personal call. If he's unable to bring Sakamoto back into the fold, then his orders are to take him out. A hard choice for Shin, who so admires him, but someone else would be sent if it isn't him, right? It might as well be him, right? That's the basic setup, the crisis of the premiere. It's not a complicated premise. The fun of it is in the rendering of Sakamoto. We never hear him speak aloud, and he mostly seems like the sedate but approachable man that everyone has come to rely on. His wife and daughter are friendly, and I'm sure don't know anything about his past. He seems to just want to preserve and coexist with this sleepy, peaceful corner of the world. But Shin, who can read minds, can see that Sakamoto still imagines himself killing people around him that anger him, and can observe, or knows how to observe firsthand, that he's every bit as lethal as he used to be. And in fact, we do hear Sakamoto's internal voice, as he knows that Shin can hear his thoughts, and he speaks to him directly, though sparingly. When things do go sideways, Sakamoto's fighting style is a blend of creative problem-solving with whatever is at hand, and absurd displays of physical capability, amusing surprises for viewer and opponent alike. I don't want to spoil any of it by putting it in the clips, and so I didn't. Shin's addition to the story enables the part of him that is still a hitman to have an outlet that we can see, and the contrast with how the other people in his life view him creates this constant comedic tension. Even though this is quite violent in parts, it's rather playful overall, and the action sequences are mostly sharply executed. And so I can't imagine this being anything except tons of fun down the line. Next pair is going to be a pair about mysteries, revolving around mysteries, though very, very different kinds. We will start with Ameku MD, Dr. Detective. This is one of the double premieres today, and I don't think any of the other ones even made it into the lineup, but so this is our one double premiere today, which affords it the opportunity to set up the characters and situation, and then set up and solve an opening mystery, giving us what I imagine is a pretty complete impression of the series to come. It will not take long to start comparing this show to the TV series House, due to the title character, Dr. Takao Ameku, occupying a similar role as the titular Dr. House, the head of a diagnostic team whose purpose is to assist with cases where other departments struggle to understand what is wrong with any particular patient. The anime even makes a lupus joke early on, referencing a popular meme about the TV show that it's never lupus, but I'm not actually sure the comparison is all that apt. I mean, yes, Takao has the same role, and likewise clashes with hospital administration to pursue whatever piques her curiosity, but to the shape of the opening mystery, her personality, her dynamic with her team, and the way her eccentricities express, I felt were far too different. It actually reminds me more of the TV show Bones, but I'm not going to assume that everyone understands that comparison. I only know it because my mother liked the show. The opening establishes her, Dr. Takao's, credentials and eccentricity, as she has one member of her team, Takanashi here, working in the understaffed emergency department. There are two cases where he is at a loss as to what vexes the patients, but he seems equally worried about what she'll do if he isn't ready to stop work when his shift ends. Takao will show up, informing him exactly how many minutes and seconds remain until he is off. She is determined to immediately begin what she calls a study session, which turns out to be forcing him to watch Jurassic Park that he has never seen. During their conversation, she will update how much time remains on his shift. She is keeping accurate count of the seconds in her head, even while they carry on. To make sure he doesn't run over, then, she will assist in diagnosing the mystery patients. One of these I find believable enough to have missed, perhaps the other not so much, but the point is to demonstrate not just her medical diagnostic skills, but her observational ones, as in both cases, she will notice things about the patients or what they have with them that will integrate into her conclusion. And this, I believe, is to justify her actual physical presence, that she does not reach her conclusion by reading charts or labs alone. She is thus set up to be more of a detective with extensive medical knowledge, and that is the actual shape of the story. Her study session plans are ruined when a call comes in about a construction worker with a missing leg. and when he arrives, we're presented with twin mysteries. His leg appears to have been bitten off by a huge creature in an area with no such creatures, and his blood is blue. He's also quite dead, but that doesn't matter to Takao, intrigued by the mystery of his death. Now from there, we're going to meet a cop in the hospital who also seems interested in the deceased, but will fend off Takao's questions. Through this, though, we learn that they have worked together in the past, that she assists law enforcement in cases where they need her expertise. And from there, in fact, the rest of the episode, and most of the next, reveal that we are in something more like a police procedural, with Takao playing the role of both Sherlock and Dr. Watson, while looking like a cute high school girl. Though apparently you should never tell her that. While her medical expertise does factor into the resolution of the mystery, far more important are standard detective skills of observation and deduction, as well as cold reads and persuasive or misleading dialogue. And she does have a pile of traits that make her a bit vexing for others, such as a lack of boundaries or concern over etiquette, a tendency to act first without explaining intent, and a stubborn obsession over whatever it is she's fixated on. We can tell that those around her are long-suffering due to her antics, but tolerate her because of her results. Now, while I don't have complaints about how the mystery unfolded and unresolved, especially the necessity of reverse engineering someone else's thought process, quite a lot of the show rides on Takao's appeal as main character, as there's very little left for the others to do, and there was nothing that corralled her impulses or penalized her for going off script. It's possible that it's only due to the double premiere's introductory nature, wanting to put as much of her personality quirks and talents on display as possible. Certainly the end implies that there are other characters and interactions that are yet to come. But only her dynamic with the homicide detective felt anything like a contention between equals. But I presume her underling Takanashi is the intended co-star, and I wish their relationship had been given better development. Cases will come and go, but the characters and their rapport, or the lack thereof, is what remains, and I felt this was a wasted opportunity to sell us on that aspect. Or rather, it makes me worry that it's not a priority for the series yet to come. And I would love to be wrong. Maybe the next episode will show one way or the other, but I have not gotten that far. Anyway, that's one mystery show. The next one is the Tasokare Hotel. I was a big fan of this premiere. I thought it was very sharp. And this entire episode, it's intended to keep us perpetually unbalanced. It allows us to feel some of the same bewilderment as our main character, as she goes from finding herself stabbed in the back without knowing who or why, to appearing in a wasteland awash in warm twilight in new clothes, and no recollection of whatever she was doing moments before. A sign appears that wasn't there before, but its purpose is just to get her to turn around to find a building that definitely wasn't there before, the titular Tasokare Hotel. We start to get answers when she goes inside, as the hotel manager, who has a flame for a head, explains that this is a sort of way station of the afterlife, a place for souls who are uncertain whether they are living or dead. She is a guest, whether she likes it or not, but upon going to sign in for the register, she'll make a discovery. She doesn't remember her name. Her face is also obscured throughout all this, that these things end up being linked, and most guests do not remember their name. In fact, remembering things is actually the point of this hotel, the purpose of their stay, and evidently quite a few people have passed through here before. While that seems to ground us a bit in terms of where and why she's in this strange place, we will repeatedly be introduced to elements that disrupt the picture we are forming of both the hotel and the shape of the story. As that is part of the appeal of how the episode is parceled out, part of the enjoyment of watching it, I didn't want to list too many of them, except to say that there are other uncertain souls in the hotel, some of which are not guests but employees. There is one detail I will add, though. Each guest has a room, and that room is tailored specifically to them. Within it are items designed to help them recover their memories. Put together enough clues, and they should remember whether they are, well, living or dead, at which point they exit the hotel towards whichever fate lies in store. The basic mechanic of the hotel means that characters who come into the story, or those already present, will one day leave it, and some will be leaving to their deaths. There's thus a bittersweet note to all character interactions. All of their moments are fleeting, and some are sure to discover a past and a future that are tragic. Now, the hotel itself has a nice gothic horror vibe to it, which amusingly contrasts with both the upbeat personalities of the employees and the modern-day details that the uncertain souls discuss, like idol bands or streaming personalities. Their own wardrobes have been shifted to match the anachronistic hotel's sensibilities, and combining that with its isolation and what appears to be a complete absence of a day-night cycle, there is this pervasive sense of unreality to the entire setting. It's like they've wandered backstage during a play, been forced into wardrobe, and then out onto the stage, but without ever seeing a script. The vibe is more one of unsettling, though, than threatening, and I think whether you jive with that or not probably figures into whether or not you're going to enjoy it. I did find the way it paced this episode and parceled out its exposition to be its most impressive quality, for even though we are repeatedly unbalanced or introduced to something new, by the end, we do have a pretty good understanding of how the hotel and the remaining story is likely to work. Despite how upbeat some of the characters appear for now, the base conceit of the story casts a bit of melancholy over the whole, and I won't be surprised if the emphasis on the ephemeral nature of their stay is the major thematic ground that it will intend to explore. Sorairo Utility. This show opens in a classroom in a girls' school where Minami, our protagonist, is complaining to her friend Izumi about a terrible turn of luck. The game she plays is going offline. What will become of all of her maxed-out characters? Izumi is unmoved by her crisis and suggests that she takes the opportunity to start something new. It's the beginning of high school, after all. Join a club, get a job, have a boyfriend, do normal teenage things. The idea of a school club unlocking some kind of hidden talent appeals to her gamer-minded self. The only question is, which club will it be? And then the opening credits run, and it's not a mystery at all. Amateur hour. For our purposes, we'll say that she starts trying them all out. Badminton, basketball, volleyball, tennis, calligraphy, band, sewing, baseball, soccer, dance, baking. Positively, everything she tries, she sucks at. No skills unlocked at all. And even doing nothing is not much of an option, as Izumi is going to join the shogi club and she'll be left alone. She encourages Minami to look around the wide world, try to find something she finds interesting. And to her credit, she does try, browsing bookstores, walking the streets, but mostly to no avail. But one day, she'll run into an old man having back trouble and difficulty carrying some sort of tall package. She comes to his aid and helps him get to his destination, which turns out to be a golf driving range. As she walks up, she sees a girl hit a drive, and she is a bit captivated, though whether by the drive or the girl is hard to say. Seeing Minami, the girl will call her over and introduce herself. This is Haruka, a third year in high school. She'll coax Minami to try a swing, and when she struggles, will assist in lining up her grip and stance, though with a proximity that makes Minami sweat a bit. While she's still no natural, but when complaining of her lack of athletic ability, Haruka will counter that golf is different. You don't need good reaction time. People of all ages can play. In fact, she believes she'd struggle in any other sport. Their conversation is cut short, as apparently Haruka works there and is late for her shift, but she encourages Minami to drop by again. Now intrigued, Minami begins to look into the whole golf thing and finds out that a lot of other girls play. And seeing the cute outfits they wear, she begins to warm up to the idea, even watching instructional videos despite having no clubs to practice with. She'll carry that enthusiasm into the next day to explain to Izumi, though she'll spin her story as though it was some kind of gaming quest. And that's a quirk of hers that she carries through the whole episode, and I guess we will carry for a bit. She'll return to the range. With Haruka's help, will connect well enough with one drive. She's excited to see the ball fly, encouraged by Haruka's own enthusiasm, and will admit that she is looking for something special. something she can become the protagonist of, to really become obsessed with. And I'll leave off there. It's basically a sports anime kind of setup, with a sport as a vehicle for self-discovery, but without any actual school club it's attached to. Maybe that changes, I don't know. The school clubs in this episode instead seem to be a means to demonstrate that Minami struggles with a lot of things that her peers can manage just fine, and this perhaps explains why she has retreated so much into gaming, a place where she does succeed. And even finding golf intriguing enough, it takes Haruka's own interest in Minami to get her to stick with it long enough to give it a fair shake. I'm not much of a golf fan. I play the other country club sport. But I felt the betrayal of the driving range and the courses and the camaraderie of the regulars that we encounter made the sport seem appealing. Not just the actual hitting of balls with clubs, but the whole package, all of the accessory activities and its idiosyncrasies. There's also a real playful looseness to the animation at times that nicely matches the girls' personalities, a nice lighthearted charm. The premiere arguably takes over long to get to its point, but the chosen stopping place is rather effective for selling the show's appeal. So I'm not going to hold it against them too much. I want to escape from princess lessons. Now, if you're like me, the title of this work seems to suggest a comedy, the story of some reluctant or headstrong princess made to suffer through lessons on being a refined, noble lady, while she schemes to avoid them, and whether is successful or not, amusing hijinks ensue. And certainly, we open with a young girl attempting to sneak barefoot through a vast halls and corridors, dodging servants, breathing heavy with adrenaline, only to find the doors to freedom shut in her face. She collapses and cries. Well, this isn't very funny. It backs up, then, to show us how this girl, Letitia, age 7, will get into this circumstance. Hers is a noble family, I believe, and a sealed letter arrives one day that contextually informs the family that she is to be engaged to Prince Clark. As such, she and her older brother move to the castle immediately, and she begins her lessons in etiquette, meant to mold her into a refined future queen. Her parents are overjoyed, and her brother Nadir glad for the opportunity it presents him. But Letitia is only dismayed, suddenly sent away from her parents and her dog and her home. And in short order, it's plain her brother is not much of an emotional support, ignoring her on the journey there just to read his books. And then, the princess lessons of the title. She is turned over to a Lila Meyer, who might very well be the platonic ideal of the stern, unyielding etiquette coach, complete with dark, no-nonsense wardrobe, a switch she uses to strike her palm for emphasis, with the implication of other uses, and an unyielding, unemotional vocal performance that is a highlight all its own. She herself starts to unravel our expectations of comedy, because nothing about her is exaggerated, nor is she particularly cruel in some kind of smirking villain way. She just has the task of turning this unrefined country girl into a noble lady, and she brooks no argument or deviation. She's a completely grounded character, so there is no place to slip in humor at all. It's all more than Letitia is equipped to handle, but crying only earns reprimands. Anything she must practice, she must complete all the way through. Any mistake means starting over and a stern rebuke from Lila. She never softens over how poorly Letitia takes it. If she is going to be a princess, then she needs to pick up a soup spoon by touching it with the correct fingers at the correct spot, and she then needs to fill it 7 to 8/10 of the way full without making contact with the bottom or sides of the bowl, and you need to perform the entire motion without changing her posture one iota. And so on for literally everything else she does: walking, speaking, sitting, lessons in dancing, politics, etc. And again, at no point is any of this funny. Her failures don't even have like a slapstick element to them, and Lila's rebukes are not dramatic enough to crack a smile. They're just relentless, strangling. She does have one attendant, Lily, who starts out waking up this bewildered young princess who can hardly return her greeting, and then waking up one that can return her greeting properly, and then the years go by, until a day when Letitia is awake before Lily comes in to rouse her. And this Letitia, now 16, is the refined princess candidate Lila has been working towards, but there is no light in her eyes at all. We'll see Lila begin to trot Letitia out as an example to other girls her age, who all coo over her refined and lovely elegance. She'll be pleased to see Letitia effortlessly rattle off the answers to her political teacher's questions, with not a hint of emotion or inflection in her voice. And we'll see her take tea with Prince Clark, her betrothed, but she might as well be a beautiful doll for all the personality she seems to show. And perhaps that is why a day comes when Letitia will enter a ballroom, to the appreciative compliments of those in attendance, to find Prince Clark with another girl on his arm. Letitia asks if this means their engagement is over, and he confirms. All of that princess training, all those years away from home, all that impact on her were for nothing. To circle back then, if you're like me, and you assumed the title meant this was comedy, your instinct was correct. But that is the part I leave to your discovery. And by the end of the episode, it seems like the story is tossing out almost all of the setup to this point. Letitia is set to move far away from the castle and anyone connected to it, to leave this chapter of her life behind, and the titular princess listens with it. They're some other girl's problems now. But the episode then does something curious. It runs the opening credits right at the end, that's normal enough. But it follows them up by running the end credits as well. And between the two, it seems rather plain that we have not thrown out as much of the setup as it appeared. And by my accounting, that is the fourth unexpected turn of the premiere. In that, then, is part of why I came away from the first episode feeling rather favorable. It does a lot well. The realism of a bewildered, ill-equipped girl struggling to cope with her strange situation, the impressive impact of Lila the etiquette coach, seriously, amazing, and even the way the opening journey to the castle contrasts the verdant countryside with the cold stone of the castle, with an accompanying shift in the score. All of that was proof enough that the story can execute. But this demonstration of audience awareness, exploited for effect, is just the sort of thing that a comedy needs to thrive. So even though I don't know what the new normal is for Letitia, these examples of storytelling prowess keeps me from being too worried about what comes next. I don't need to know the rest. You demonstrated that I'm in good hands. Anyway, let's move on to ZENSHU. Okay, so as is often the case, when I'm doing these and writing these out, I have a choice between preserving the surprise a premiere has in store and giving you an accurate enough picture of the premise to decide if it piques your interest. Now, historically, I have chosen the latter whenever the surprise is the story's inciting event, or provides a hook that I think is more compelling than the rest of the setup. This one has both, but I am choosing only to include the inciting event, and I am giving you this warning. ZENSHU is about a woman named Natsuko Hirose, whose meteoric rise in the world of animation finds her at the director's seat of an original feature film after her TV series' directorial debut became a sensational success. Her impressive rise, despite her age, has her hailed as a genius, and there's no doubt her film will be a smash hit. And with a summary like that, you surely know that it's not going as expected. Natsuko is responsible for the storyboarding, and quite a lot of the production waits on that, but she cannot seem to produce anything she finds acceptable, and she absolutely will not let anyone else do it. She is refusing to cut her hair until it's done, and the combination with her ever-present purple hoodie has, at this stage, rendered her as someone you may even question as human. As such, we don't see her face at all, and must derive her characterization from her body language and her brief, terse interactions with other staff members, who are understandably on edge. Though she narrated her history to this point for us, it gave us little insight into what makes her tick, or what specifically she is struggling with, and so for a time she is as inscrutable to us as she is to the cast. This changes when she reads an obituary of an industry peer who died of food poisoning. Natsuko finds herself turning on one of the deceased woman's works, an anime film called A Tale of Perishing. It was a depressing and mentally scarring work, considered a flop by the industry, but she has watched it many times. In fact, it's implied she was so affected by seeing it in a theater as a little girl that it started her on the path to being an animator and everything that came after. However many times she's seen it, though, she doesn't get it, but she also thinks that's what makes it so great. So, finally, some insight into her personality and thought process as a creator. And then she dies. From food poisoning, as it happens, not overwork, not a truck, nothing like that. And I'm actually not 100% sure that she is dead, considering what happens next. She wakes up inside a tale of perishing, and she has a much harder time believing that than the audience does, and her first interactions with the characters she knows or should know doesn't go at all like she probably expects, or would have expected even if she knew she was in the story world. But eventually she does accept that she's here in the last town, humanity's final outpost against the insectoid void, protected by Luke Braveheart of the 9 soldiers, of which we are down to 4. Well, it's not called a tale of surviving, is it? Natsuko will realize she is at a point in the story before things get really bad, before points of no return are crossed. In a sense, she knows the future, and like many in that position, finds herself questioning what to do with that knowledge, or even whether anything could be changed. But, unlike most of those other future-seeing protagonists, she's a storyteller herself, and she knows the story she is in was poorly received and was confined to the dustbin of history, and yet also a story she thought was great, that she kept circling back to. The question of whether or not to avert a tragedy, to dial back all this perishing, carries a rather different subtext, though it is largely one the audience themselves must wrestle with, as Natsuko is in said world and just needs to survive. How her ultimate decision and the shape it takes, how that plays out, I'll leave that to your discovery. It's probably what is most memorable about the premiere. We in the audience are left with something rather interesting to me in terms of the ideas that are being played with. Someone with knowledge of future events trying to avert tragedy is a normal human impulse and defines the plot for a whole host of stories. And Natsuko certainly has that impulse. She is human, despite how she looks. But the story world and its reception give this a little spice. If it was a tragic tale but much lauded, and she decides to save characters that should have died, then that's one kind of setup, as the choice then seemed to be about the artistic value of tragedy. This story world was a panned failure instead, and so perhaps any changes are good ones. But it was a story that impacted Natsuko, that she kept coming back to. Would that have been the case if the story was changed in a way that made it popular and praised? And furthermore, she is a storyteller completely stuck in her own creative process, unable to make choices, or unable to accept the ones she makes are good enough to keep. Well, she is now in a position to make choices about how the story she's in develops. But if she makes a mistake, or doesn't like what she's chosen, there is no option to crumple up the page and try again. I am amused to be reminded of an old aphorism in the academic world: publish or perish. That's the big picture as I see it, though there are lots of little hairline threads it might pull on as we go along. For example, the actions of one character mirroring some of her own, and how she reacts to that when she witnesses it in someone else. Interestingly enough, the anime industry part of this could probably have been subbed out for any other entertainment medium, and still preserve the core creative process struggle. There isn't anything specific to anime that precipitates her crisis that couldn't also happen to a novelist or a musician on a deadline. Rather, it's just that animation makes a much better match to what they want to do visually, and so it's the logical choice. And of course, if you are going to make animation part of your subject matter, you had best be ready to deliver some impressive examples of your own, which I do believe they rather manage, just not in the clips that I have shown you today. This is an anime original, so there is no risk of aggro or spoilers from sources, which is always nice. But while I do believe the work has great promise, it has an equal measure of potential pitfalls. I would surely need to see how this unique viewpoint on storytelling decision-making is handled in the subsequent episodes, because it could easily be too overt or too subtle. The kind of impact Natsuko is capable of has the potential to rob the tale of its tension, though she equally has the option to do nothing, and perhaps that is the tension. The characters so far, including her, are not particularly endearing, and I'm unsure if the tropiness of the story world is a deliberate choice to be examined, or just a way to shortcut the setup. But would any of those reservations stop me from watching more? Well, perish the thought. Babanba vampire. It's not an interlude because I actually do have things to say. Whatever else you want to say about this show, you cannot accuse it of pulling its punches. And you can't accuse the titular vampire of being the same old thing, alright? Said vampire is Ranmaru Mori, and he has lived and worked at a family-owned bathhouse for the past 10 years. It's rather an ideal arrangement, as he cleans the baths after they close at night and can sleep through the daytime sun. What he's really there for is the family's son, 15-year-old Rihito. Ranmaru has been around for 2/3 of his life, and he comes to him with his troubles or when seeking advice. Ranmaru is always there for the lad. But it turns out, this is not due to Ranmaru's magnanimous nature. Instead, his mission for the past decade and the next 3 years is to continue to watch and guide Rihito's unsullied soul, as he puts it, ensuring that he will reach the age of 18 while still a virgin. At that point, Ranmaru will make a meal of him. Well, he's a vampire, after all, and they all have their preferences. His happens to be 18-year-old virgin boys, and he is willing to go to rather great lengths for his favorite food. And while a lot of vampire stories imply parallels between the desire for blood and sexual desire, this one hasn't the slightest use for something so tame as imply. In fact, if you haven't seen this, I might have just done you a favor here, because it will first show his overt and sexually charged desire for the teenager's body first, before tacking on that it's because he wants to drink his blood, which made for a very icky 20 seconds. On the first day of high school, Rihito has a little meet-cute collision with a girl, decides that he's in love, and he comes to confide in his pal Ranmaru about this exciting development in his life. But a girl and love? That's an existential threat to the vampire's long cultivation of Rihito as a gourmet feast, and so the crisis of the work going forward: defend Rihito's virginity at all costs. With that as the setup, I presume that the work as a whole will bend towards the comedic. But the premiere only takes a handful of opportunities to showcase its humor. The way it ends leads me to believe that this is just a byproduct of the complex setup, and the subsequent episodes will be more focused on comedy. As Ranmaru's goal isn't a sympathetic one, I guess that he will be the butt of the joke as often as not. Within this episode, at least, we see how easily he can lose his head or forget to mask his intent, so a main character who is the architect of their own demise is probably what we're going for. Ranmaru as characterized is a risky choice, though. Even if it is for a meal, the close parallel to sexuality makes his fixation on this child for 10 years an uncomfortable reality to put aside for the sake of potential laughs. That he is only pretending to be his trusted older figure to get what he wants is rather close to the actuality of sexual predators grooming their victims. But the choice of making it all about protecting a boy's virginity rather than the all-too-common fixation on a girl's is a bit of a change-up. In fact, Ranmaru has a moment to rant at humanity for treating male virginity as something that is shameful. I certainly imagine there will be someone in the audience who is weirded out by this setup, but may not have been if it was the expected vampire-preferring virgin girls trope. And Rihito is every bit the naive innocent, his newfound love simple and sweet rather than a carnal urge. He almost certainly is meant as a male version of the ingenue archetype, which especially leads me to believe that this is flipping the script for audience perspective reasons. Anyway, my impression is that this premiere is uncomfortable but is meant to be, and we are setting up Ranmaru to be someone that the audience doesn't mind laughing at down the stretch. Unfortunately, though, we just didn't get many examples of what kind of comedy it has in store, so why would I be compelled to continue forward? Now, back to pairs. We've got pairs, and these next two are teenage melodrama, and lots of it, as opposed to like teenage rom-com. We've had some of those, but this is melodrama. I usually mention reservations I have about a work at the end of each of these bits, as I have been doing. In the case of Honey Lemon Soda, which is our next one, in the case of Honey Lemon Soda, most of the ingredients of the story are fine, so if I convert it into a summarization, it is probably going to come off as a coherent narrative. But I don't think that's what we actually got in this premiere. There is a coherent narrative in there, but it's been cut apart and pasted back together for effect to bring a few elements together for a climactic culmination. The choices of where to cut and rearrange, though, leave something to be desired. Too many of the cast's decisions are made without building understanding of the character motivations or mindsets, and the fact that our main character is in an unexpected environment isn't explained until well after it would have been useful to contextualize the whole first half. It probably makes sense if you've read its source or know anything about it, but the few hints that do exist seem like non sequiturs at the time, because we don't know anything about the characters who are giving said hints. Rather than give you the setup chronologically, or as some kind of narrative summary, what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to introduce two characters and some of the questions this premiere seems to revolve around. All right? Long preamble, I know, but I started writing this and I'm like, this sounds more coherent than whatever it was I just watched, so hold on. So we'll start off. Our main character is Uka Ishimori, and she desperately wants to change who she is. Her parents are overprotective, and she has let them coddle her for so long that she has little skills for crises or socialization. She is, however, a great student. In middle school, her personality earned her the ire of bullies, who nicknamed her Stony, for the way she would freeze in place and the lack of expression on her face. But she has an escape route, as she is the only student of the school who has a chance of getting into a certain elite academy, and none of the tormentors could follow her. The unanswered question in the premiere is why is she instead at a third-rate high school full of rowdy or unserious students? It is heavily implied in the opening to have something to do with a student of her age named Kai Miura, a handsome but blonde hair-dyed guy who is a little bit rough around the edges. His current drink of choice is lemon soda, matching his hair, and an early confrontation between him and some other students will see Uka doused with the soda instead of the intended targets. One of his friends fusses over her, and she's overwhelmed at someone being so kind, but Kai only gives a terse apology. And the other friends don't even realize that she's someone in their class. As to what the relationship is between Kai and Uka, we only get him staring at her, and she cracks under the pressure to run away. Now, because of that incident, she'll have to change into her gym clothes, and is mortified at the thought that the teacher might single her out. She does not like attention. But he instead singles out Kai, who for some reason is in his own gym clothes, and though the teacher will notice that she is as well, Kai gives an explanation about each of them being doused in soda, deflecting all the attention that she feared. So, the second unanswered question throughout the premiere is Kai's behavior towards her. We're in her head all the time, so we understand that she is besotted with him after some very brief past encounter. But he is a much harder read, for the apparent kindness of the gym clothes is balanced by the brusque and sometimes patronizing way that he speaks to her in their few encounters. Again, Uka desperately wants to change who she is, to have a cheerful, happy high school life, but she struggles mightily to make progress. And then, some of her tormentors from middle school will discover that she is at this school with them, and so the worst parts of her previous status quo return. So, our opening conflict. How will she bridge the gap between who she is and who she wants to become, as friendless and inexperienced as she is? Now, there are things in this I liked, the ultimate answer to why she's at this high school, and the parts of her inner monologue concerning her opinion of herself build a sympathetic picture. Her extremes in other areas emphasize how unusually inexperienced she is socially, but I could equally see someone finding them too exaggerated to be plausible. Once we get a fuller picture of Kai and his friends, they grow on us a bit as well, but the bullies are just silly caricatures. The story's tone is almost always serious and dramatic. So the lightness of the art you see, it isn't matched by the mood that we get in the opening, but it's entirely possible that may change going forward. For this one, though, it was this constant dissonance between the two. If subsequent episodes don't try to be too complex for their own good, then it might actually have some legs. But I do not think this premiere was the best foot forward. Alright, so again, we're in teenage melodrama mode for the next one. Anyway, I'm falling. There's not enough room to put more H's there. Anyway, I'm falling in love with you is the title of this, which would not fit, and so, you know what's better than a romance story involving a childhood friend? One that involves 4 childhood friends. That makes it 4 times as fun, and not at all more complicated, right? Anyway, I'm Falling in Love with You is presented as a recollection of adolescence by a woman named Mizuho Nishino. The opening will set the framing device. It's her birthday, and she's received bad news about work, an awful present. She'll be passed by 5 teenagers, a girl going around with 4 boys, and it will remind her of herself at that age. With the perspective of time, she will realize that she had a sparkling adolescence despite what she believed then, and that thought takes her back to another awful birthday, her 17th, in July of 2020. Though it doesn't name it directly, this story takes place during the height of COVID, and the way the pandemic disrupted the school year and various competitions and festivals is relevant to the plot and characterization. The familiar is upended and uncertain, and the same thing begins to happen among her and her closest friends, which are all boys. The 5 of them grew up in the same neighborhood and have been thick as thieves since before grade school. Mizuho thinks nothing of having had one of the boys over late into the night, shirtlessly modeling for her aspiring manga career until they have both fallen asleep. Their dynamic is more like siblings than friends. They needle each other, they tease one another, and from her perspective, they have no secrets between them. As such, they know all about her pining for one of the guys on the swim team, and that situation is what makes it the awful birthday. She'd intended to confess to him at the final meet of the year, but it was cancelled, and the uncertainty of when or if meets resume led to him quitting the team and generally being discouraged about the whole affair. She'll make a clumsy attempt to engage him about continuing to swim, awkwardly kind of sharing her confession in the process, but he isn't receptive to either idea. She'll think to herself that her one-sided love is over. And perhaps because of this, one among her friends will act on his own secret feelings. The proverbial snowball rolled downhill. I'll skip some details, but in essence, Mizuho does not see her longtime guy friends as guys at all, even if the girls around her do. In fact, she still pictures them as she squared them as kids, missing how things have changed as they've grown up, taking for granted that they each still think of her as she thinks of them. Once one of them steps out of this expectation, though, a ripple begins in the group. There's a nice pair of scenes of them gathering to walk to school together, one before and one after the inciting event, and you can tell in the small changes between them how this shift has begun. So one last thing. We'll see her meet with a manga editor as she is trying to submit her work even as a teenager, and he rejects the thing she has. He suggests she write a school romance in her own words, but she begs off, saying her love life is hardly interesting and she lacks experience. He's sure she lives an exciting and sparkling adolescence every day, but she can't agree. This then links up with the framing device, but it mostly highlights this recurring idea that Mizuho doesn't fully perceive what is happening around her, in the hearts of her friends or in herself. And because we know she didn't realize it at the time, it suggests a rather tumultuous and bittersweet road ahead. Now, this is definitely shoujo romance with its attendant tropes, which is not the same thing as a harem show with the genders swapped. All right. Honestly, that would be interesting to compare one day. But my point is that both are very taste dependent. I really liked Mizuho's characterization. I like the slow gravity of the drama, but I hate the kind of things which are counted as romantic gestures in this genre. But you might love them, and your experience will be very different from mine. I also don't think this is going to blow your hair back with its animation or its acting or anything like that. The production isn't the selling point, other than the design. The production isn't the selling point so much as the sheer potential for melodrama. And boy oh boy does it have that in spades. Alright, for a palate cleanse after all that teenage angst, how about middle-aged guys in other worlds for a pair? If you're in advance? There we go. The daily life of a middle-aged online shopper in another world. Whatever are we in for here? I think half the reason I want to talk about this is the opening scene. Which is a rapid-fire montage and 2001 A Space Odyssey homage showing some kind of green fairy things in a pod of her Earth. A guy named Kenichi, who is overworked, collapses, moves to the country to work remote, raise food, take life easy. One day, while in the middle of using a shopping tablet, is transported to another world, presumably by the meddling green fairies. His evolution from salaryman, or whatever it was, he was doing some kind of art, to contented countryside worker, also doing art, the to then isekai protagonist is the tip of the hat to the film reference. And it drops us into the story with a minimum of preamble, 32 seconds, in fact. What's more, several of the details of that situation, a lot of the things you just saw, were, or things you will see him try, were contained in that speedrun that you just saw part of. Like it picked a whole bucket full of exposition and Chekhov's guns and just dumped them all over us. For example, we had a flash of him watching some anime where a guy throws out his hand and says, "Status open," and so now he tries the same thing, and it works. He has a little game-like pop-up menu. Though instead of stats or health bars or whatever, it just has two things. It says Shangri-La and Item Box. I'm sure you all know what an item box is. And Shangri-La ends up being the shopping app he was using at the moment he was yoinked into this forest in another world. Fiddling with it for a bit, he figures out that he can push items in to a part of the interface that accepts payment, and the app will convert it into the value of what he does into yen and give him a balance on his account. In reverse, he can spend that balance, whatever he buys materializes in the world with him. Item box means he can store and retrieve any of it at will, and so now he just has to figure out how to use this to survive the forest long enough to reach a human settlement. While it does spend just a moment kind of explaining that, let me back up a second, to ensure that the full mechanic is explained, it is pretty concise. It does not waste time showing him go through the process again unless it's story relevant. Instead, it does this. Anything he buys with the app will be labeled with its price the first time we see it, including the little bit in parentheses that indicates it's the price after sales tax. And it does that every time, which kind of becomes this a little humorous bit. We'll also see him just master the storage retrieval of the item box by seeing him do it. He doesn't explain what he's ever doing, it trusts us to figure these things out. The story, then, is him attempting to figure out how to use the items from a Japanese storefront to make his way in the world. A mountain bike to escape the forest, headlamp to ride at night, food and drink as needed, and of course, the most obvious plan of all, figuring out what kind of items he can pull from our world to turn a profit in this one. This is not the first time we've run across that story mechanic, even the shows I've talked about up here since I've been doing the preview show. The novelty of this resides in that opening, and the possibility that this is an alien-induced isekai. It's not really clear on that point just yet. But it is refreshing in how concisely it manages to put its conceit together. And then, and again, how it introduces each relevant new bit of information as he makes it out of the forest, catches a ride with a merchant, and goes into the nearest city. Equally refreshing in the isekai space is that he is a grown man, Not a grown man in a teenager's body, not a teenager or whatever. He's a grown man, 38, if his status is to be believed, and he largely acts like it. He interacts with people with confidence, he makes judgments from experience, and he very thoughtfully researches and plans his attempts to set up shop as a merchant. When the worker at the inn flirts with him, he's not a blustering mess or clueless as to her intent, but he parlays it into an advantage, hiring her to teach him how to read and write this nation's language. The aptitudes he displays, like some basic carpentry, some skill with a slingshot, they're all established as part of his former life in the opening. But it's a fantasy world with things he's never seen, a culture with idiosyncrasies he doesn't grasp, and so there is still plenty around to surprise or challenge him. In other words, this is an awfully grounded and realistic way I'd expect a 38-year-old dropped into this world with a magic app to behave, both in his approach and the things that he excels or fails at. That, to me, is its greatest strength. And so, a caveat to that greatest strength. The credits run at the end, and the story they depict gets rather wildly out of hand. And maybe everything we see is also carefully introduced and slotted into the logic of the story, but it's a heck of a contrast to where we are right now. So maybe it does jump the shark in the future. But for now, it's a kind of refreshing version of the merchant isekai setup. Another middle-aged, or so, I'm not actually sure how old the guy is, another middle-aged guy isekai'd, and who then acts like it, is headhunted to another world. Now, the title does give away the isekai setup. It's something of an affectionate parody at times. It'll directly name a few isekai tropes that it eschews, and then it indulges in a few others with gusto. It opens in your typical Demon Lord stormy castle, where the big bad guy is summoning the 4 elite generals of his demon army to get on with the typical Demon Lord hobby of taking over the world. And while the first 3 look and sound like the kind of folks who'd lead a demon army, the final general is summoned from our world, Oversiege Manager Dennosuke Uchimura. The credits run, and we get Uchimura's history, an insignificant salaryman by his own reckoning who landed whatever job he could manage. His boss evidently had it out for him, holding back promotions until transferring him overseas to manage a struggling factory, a career dead end, and maybe a bit of hazing, as he couldn't speak the language and the home office provided no support. But he bore down to try to turn it around, ran himself a bit ragged, eventually learned the local language and earned the workers' trust. And as thanks, he's set up to be transferred to a different foreign country to start all over. But suddenly this new option: accept this offer of Demon Army General. Understandably, he has reservations, but our Demon Lord has his whole resume in hand, lists out his impressive turnaround of the overseas factory, and offers him a position equivalent to the department managers of his own world. He even gets to choose subordinates, have his own office. Plus, he won't force him. He can go back to his world and job if he likes. And better still, the Demon Lord thinks his boss was a fool who didn't value all his important background work. He intends to bring out his full potential. While Uchimura originally wondered if he's been summoned to hell, the thought of such an appreciative boss sounds like heaven instead, but the other generals object, especially when they learn that he didn't receive any kind of special powers for being summoned here, like they have heard often happens with otherworldly humans. He is in fact just a normal guy, and the Demon Lord literally just wants his effective management experience. To placate his generals, Uchimura is given a test which forms the latter half of the episode. We're not going to go into it, but it's basically a test of negotiation and understanding between people with different cultural norms. And as the demon army is made up of all kinds of different monstrous people, it's rather clear why the Demon Lord wanted Uchimura and his apparent superpower of managing foreigners. Now, in the final accounting, the test wasn't something too crazy, maybe even underwhelming. But I am amused by this isekai variation. Using knowledge from Earth to succeed in another world that is less technologically advanced, that's a common setup, with or without receiving any extra powers that go along with it. But in this case, it has nothing to do with technology. He just has good management skills and work ethic, and this demon lord is savvy enough to know that an organization as large as a demon army doesn't succeed on its might alone, which is a nice little change-up. The character designs are also really nice from what has been shown so far. I mean, he looks like a salaryman like he should, but I mean everybody else. This episode features a lot of one other general in particular, this fiery snake demon girl, and I have to imagine he'll have run-ins with the others as we go along. She at least is a bit of fun in a spicy, antagonistic way. A bit of a counter to Uchimura's flatter and more subdued personality. He is just a salaryman, after all. But while I do like the idea of Uchimura's very boring, very standard Earth job being something exotic and effective when applied to a fantasy army, this first chance to wow us with what he can do struck me as anticlimactic. I assume future episodes involve more of this from him, with different mixes of problems and monster cultures, but I realize I'm not very excited about it. I was sorely tempted to look ahead and see if the next episode has a more impressive example, but I thought better of it. This was their choice of how to make a good first impression, after all, so it's what I've restricted myself to for giving an impression today. I will at least check it out for my own viewing decision, as I like enough other aspects of what the work is doing. I hope that it can make it work. Alright, so that's two kinds of wish fulfillment of the middle-aged worker doing kind of what they were doing before in the world. This next one is just wish fulfillment in general. Luckily, thanks to the title of this, I don't have to make any decision about how far I take you, where exactly I lead you in the setup. Welcome to Japan, Ms. Elf. Once you hear the setup, you'll know where I need to go, and so I will. And I'll end up setting up the entire premise. Perhaps the most impressive thing about this series is that it manages to combine multiple audience escape fantasies into one, while having a main character whose highest priority in life is also an escapist fantasy. Allow me to explain. Kuzuhiro is a 25-year-old salaryman who clocks out at quitting time on the dot, every day without fail. That alone might count as fantasy, but the reason he does so is to go home and get in bed as soon as he has cooked and packed a bento. He loved fantasy stories as a kid. He used to read books until he wore them all the way out, and at some point in his youth, he started having incredibly vivid dreams. To wit, in his dreams, he returns to the same place, a world of swords and magic, and has been doing so since he was a young boy. He's made friends there, learned fantasy languages, he goes on whatever adventure strikes his fancy. If he takes a wrong turn, does it wrong, is killed by a monster, well, the dream ends, he wakes up back in his bed, but mostly, he just enjoys this elaborate second life like he is a kid again. One of the friends that he has made is an elf named Marie. And one of the reasons that she's fond of seeing him is the aforementioned bento. For whatever reason, he can take the bento into his dream with him, and she is over the moon for the quality and variety of his Japanese fare. On the occasion we are following them, then, his curiosity will lead them into a ruin and an encounter with a nesting dragon that ends up taking exception to their presence. They'll find themselves on the receiving end of some dragon fire, and he will instinctively grab her, bummed a bit that he's dying in today's dream and therefore cutting it short. Like usual, he wakes up back in bed, but someone else has come along for the ride. Welcome to Japan, Ms. Elf. This certainly casts some doubt on whether he's just a really active dreamer all this time. Mari in his world must mean instead that he was traveling to a real place, and that whatever sends him back to bed when he dies instead of, well, killing him, has now also saved her and dropped her into our world. But he had actually talked about his homeland of Japan with her for years, and so she'd been trying the cooking and all that time, so she's really more excited than frightened by the turn of events, and he shows her around. That is the setup. And while it doesn't happen in this episode, they seem confident that she can travel back to her world in the same way he does, and so, multiple escapist fantasies. He can continue going on adventures in her world as he's done all along, but she can also take her own adventures in our world. And as they are a little flirty, there might be a bit of the elf girlfriend fantasy to throw on top. It does have a few dashes of titillation. So, while nothing fancy, this looks like a cute, romantic portal fantasy, where each gets the wonder of exploring the other's world, taking turns as host and guest as they spend time together. Just a nice little vibe of a show. Not exactly escapist, but certainly in the same manner of, I'm going to put this on because I want to be in a better mood, like I will for Welcome to Japan, is OKITSURA. Fell in love with an Okinawan girl, but I just wish I know what she's saying. And it occurred to me while writing this that the segment I did in Casual Monday for this show would have worked for the preview show, and I didn't want to just replay it, but I'm going to repeat a few things if you have seen that. Firstly, that the title is somewhat misleading. There is indeed a guy who fell in love with an Okinawan girl. His name is Teruaki, but is called Teru for reasons that actually are explained, and he's a recent transfer from Tokyo. Accordingly, he is rendered as paler than his Okinawan classmates and neighbors, but there is another important difference. Lots of residents speak the original language Uchiganuchi into their speech, and he understands not a lick of it. Thus, there is the Okinawan girl he fell in love with, Kyon, but as the title promises, he wishes he knows what she's saying, as she is the biggest offender of mixing in liberal amounts of the dialect. Both the title and opening scene present this as our romantic comedy dilemma. He has a crush but can't communicate with her, and so how can his courting move forward? Fortunately, Kyon has a friend, Kana, who is often around to translate for him, assisting his determination to begin picking the language up. But this is not charity, and it's not a convenient fix to the rom-com hurdle. Kana herself crushes on Teru. Her translating is an excuse to engage with him, and what's more, she is the second main character, sharing the role of point of view with him. And she is indeed a far more developed character by the end of the premiere than the friend Kyon, who is actually hard to get to know since her words often have to be parsed through someone else and delivered with another person's voice and intonation. Kyon also seems to have a much narrower range of emotions, primarily exuberant happiness. It is cute, and I understand why Teru wants to know more about her, which puts Kana in a delicate place, as translating lets them interact, but there are moments when she distinctly does not want to translate what Kyon says. So that's the real romantic comedy setup, which is much more robust than just a language barrier, thankfully. The appeal of the show to me, though, is in just how downright charming it is. The episode is a series of vignettes, though very well integrated with one another, and each seems to highlight an aspect of Okinawan culture or the Uchi-Naguchi language. In fact, one rather amusing bit explains why they all call him Teru. The work feels like a love letter to Okinawa, even explaining how proud the residents are of their cultural quirks and foods, and Teru gets to be our ignorant audience insert to learn all about it. But that also means this is a fish-out-of-water comedy as well as a romantic one, providing more opportunities for he and Kyon and Kana to interact in ways that vex him and amuse us. It's never mean-spirited, though. In fact, the humor is overwhelmingly wholesome and lighthearted, and it's not afraid to reach for exaggeration or shifting style for effect. The pacing is also a real high point. Slowing briefly at the few moments that need to breathe, but otherwise moving at a great clip, transitioning vignettes so well that the whole episode feels just bursting with energy. I was delighted while watching it, but going back through, was truly impressed at the decision-making necessary to pull off that effect. I'm really having to reach to come up with something like a caveat to this. And the best I can manage is that it's unclear how complex the character development will be over the long haul, but it's hard to imagine a romantic comedy that neglects that aspect, and Kyon's slower development feels like it's a deliberate choice. So, go forth and be charmed like I was. This could have maybe gone with the middle-aged guy, isekai setup, but I feel like Villianess is enough of a subgenre now to be broken out on its own. everyone please allow me to show you the first 8 seconds of this anime. So as you can see, the isekai setup perfected. And it's all uphill from here. No notes. For me, this is one of the best premieres of the day, and even its credit sequences are both standouts. Now, this titular dad that's been reincarnated is a 52-year-old bureaucrat, and he finds himself in the body of Grace, the haughty daughter of the kingdom's second most powerful family, and engaged to the first prince of the most powerful family, just before she is to enter a magic academy for royals that is all based on an otome game. Yes, it doesn't mess with the standard setup even a little bit, and it ensures that we know it, right down to having a commoner girl as the original main character of the game, who has gotten into said academy by achieving the top entrance score, an array of male suitors that will cross her path, and an antagonistic villainess, that's us, who is meant to thwart her. It's important that the world setting be the bog standard one, to better appreciate how Grace suddenly being a 50-something dad instead of a stuck-up Ojo changes how it develops. Now, our dad here was an accomplished otaku himself. In fact, he regales us with a history of ringlet-clad characters as love rivals at one point. But while he understands isekai well enough, he does not know much about otome games. Fortunately, his daughter was playing the one that he finds himself in, so he has seen a little bit of it, and he also has all of Grace's memories from before the horse riding accident. His intent is to play Grace's role of villainess as best he can manage, and so he stakes out the entrance on the first day of school to confront the game's main character, a girl named Anna Doll. He knows he's supposed to berate her for her family's low standing, drawing a line between her and everyone else on campus. But in the process of doing so, well, he finds himself slipping into dad mode and ends up praising her parents for having raised her well enough to achieve the top marks that gained her entrance. He immediately chastises himself for not playing a proper villainess, and in fact, a lot of the humor in the episode resides in his ongoing inner monologue, delivered in his original voice, which doesn't just contrast with Grace's looks and speech, but is a source of amusing commentary and observation as he tries to navigate each situation. The back and forth between his intent, what he actually does or says, and his after-action assessment is the basic engine of the comedy, intermixed with a lot of moments where he still has a middle-aged mind, and so he forgets things like names. Now, that first encounter brings Anna to tears, but grateful tears. To think that someone of the nobility would speak so graciously of her parents. Everyone else, though, sees the imperious Grace speak to the commoner, who then cries and assumes that she has given her a good tongue-lashing. He will then spirit her away to privacy, advises her that it's not good to show her emotions, to let her emotions run free with so much nobility about. But Anna interprets this as Grace taking her under her wing to help her understand how to behave at the school. Thus does he accidentally achieve an admirer and protege, and thanks to Anna's mindset, his own frankly milquetoast attempts to berate her over the course of the episode, she will believe, are gentle teachings to help her conduct herself in a way that avoids shame. His own tendency to slip into dad mode rather helps this impression along. And that is the basic setup. As much as he tries and even believes that he is pulling off a good villainess, his own paternalistic instincts peek out and change how Grace is received. As a longtime public servant, he is also naturally diplomatic and gracious, so ends up making inappropriately refined impressions on others as well. Let me share with you a little bit of storytelling cleverness. He has something that he calls the elegance cheat. When he attempts to perform something like a polite bow in the way a 52-year-old male bureaucrat would, the world morphs it into the appropriate matching gesture for a refined, noble lady. Now, all this is doing is hand-waving his ability to blend in when he would ordinarily not know the first thing about this setting's etiquette. It would be something of a plot hole otherwise. Instead, they call attention to it, give it a humorous name, and a little power-up kind of effect, turning story convenience into humor instead. Now, aside from that sort of cleverness and its pretty excellent instinct for humor, he's just a really likable character. From a few flashbacks, we can tell he had a great relationship with his daughter, and so he very easily slips into wanting to protect and guide Anna. As an adult, he sees the other spoiled nobles as just kids, and tends towards leading by better example instead of confrontation. Despite his dismay at being reincarnated as a teenage girl, he has a good attitude about the whole thing, and his own curiosity in analyzing the situation is entertaining in its own right. And he's not flawless, sometimes addled by his much older brain, and sometimes just misunderstanding some otome game conventions. Again, no notes. Last in our lineup is Flower and Asura. The subject matter this anime revolves around is recitations, the reading of verse or stories as a kind of performance art. That is, a medium with no visual component. Just the content of the words and whatever emotion or flourish the speaker imbues into them. Imagery of any kind resides solely in the mind's eye of those who listen. For this visual medium of anime, then, the recitations we get will be accompanied by the creative imaginings of one hearing the performance, morphing the world around them with visuals inspired by the words and delivery of the speaker, and I've decided not to show any of them in the clips today, just so you can see them. But we get the reverse of that as well. Quite a lot of this premiere is told through imagery only. There's these frequent stretches with no dialogue, only the language of expressions and gestures, or just meaningful framing. The effectiveness of this contrast is particularly pronounced when it comes to our main character, Hana. The episode opens with her as a young girl watching a recitation of verses on television by another young girl, and she is moved by the performance, adopting an aspiration to do something similar one day. In the present, she is about to enter high school, and we catch up to her doing an animated reading of stories for young children. We'll learn that Hana lives on an island, and she has no peers around her age, just the youngsters. These storytelling sessions, then, are something that the islanders set up for her, a vehicle for recitations, and the kids and adults love that she does them. A future senpai of hers will overhear the performance, a girl named Mizuki, and tries to recruit her to the broadcasting club after praising her reading. She'll explain that she's club president, and their club's actually pretty amazing if she says so herself, having made it to nationals the previous year. But Hana wasn't aware there was such a thing as nationals for broadcasting, and Mizuki is amusingly flustered to explain how big an event it is. Hana even has a recitation category. Hana not knowing this is interesting in its own right, but her ongoing conversation teases more discrepancies out. Mizuki wants talented people like her, she says, but she deflects the compliment. As she says she can't join clubs anyway, as she would miss the last ferry home. Mizuki, though, insists that she'll keep asking until she joins. And that night in bed, Hana will hold a book of verse in her hand and think, I like doing recitations, I guess? A question. On the day of the entrance ceremony, Hana will be accompanied by her mother, who thanks the ferryman for all the upcoming times that he will be taking her to school. We'll learn then that Hana is the sole passenger for these ferrying trips. She's the only reason that he has to bother, the only student on the island of an age to go to school. Going along then, a picture begins to form of Hana, though we have to infer some of it from her gestures, glances, and hesitations. Hana is uncertain and isolated, and tries to avoid being a bother. She looks at her feet a lot, and in fact, so do we, as though she is trying to hide from the audience as well. She inhibits herself, so much so that even presented with this perfect opportunity to chase her aspiration, she pulls back. In fact, she had not even learned about recitation clubs or competitions in all this time. Isn't this something that she loves and wants to do? Or is it not? Well, that gets answered well enough, but I'm not going to answer for you. I was certainly confounded by Hana's characterization through about half of this, but by the end, it felt like I rather understood, and I realized only when writing all this out that I had been led to feel as uncertain as she did, that I was also trying to complete the picture but was missing a piece. Recitation is an esoteric subject as anime goes, and so this premise must sell us on it as something robust enough to spin a series around, at the same time that it sells us on the story and characters. Utilizing so much unadorned imagery to counterbalance the moments of dramatic music and speech creates this wide dynamic range of audience stimulation, both the calm and the storm, and in that contrast is recitation given its significance. And thus too do we understand Hana, who likewise seems to contain these conflicting states, as does the title, Flower and Asura. Having an episode echo a character as this does is quite the opening statement for the series, for which I have the highest of hopes. And that's the 2025 Winter Preview Show.